you, Karan. Please take over from here.
So do you want me to start?
Thank you very much, Karan. This is a completely alien territory for me. This is my first full-fledged Zoom conversation, Karan.
I have to tell you, it's mine as well. I've played around with Zoom with my nephew in Dubai, but pretty unsuccessfully. Most of the time, he tells me to press a particular button, I press the wrong one. So let's hope everything goes okay today.
That's right. We're going to talk a bit about the politics of pandemics, Karan, in the times in which we live. And, let's take off from the introduction. Have you ever seen a time like Corona in your long experience as a journalist? I certainly haven't seen a time where the world seems to have shifted so dramatically.
No, and I don't think anyone in living memory would have either. I think the nearest similar situation would probably be what they call the Great Influenza Pandemic of 1918, which was in a sense a product of the First World War and the returning soldiers. And that certainly hit India disproportionately. Of the 70-80 million people who died worldwide, I think something like 17-18 million were in India. But since then, there's been nothing of this proportion. And even the trauma that we went through in 47 at partition, I think would pale in comparison, not just to the numbers that are threatened, but the sense of panic that has swept through the country. And in some ways, the panic is perhaps a bigger worry for me, because I think it paralyzes people. It forces them to worst case scenarios. And sometimes that forces them to take drastic action. And it's only with hindsight that you realize you've overreacted. At the moment, you think you're giving yourself a safety net, but you might discover that in fact it was a terrible overreaction.
That's one way of looking at it, Karan. The other way, of course, is as we've seen across the world, including your other home country of the United Kingdom, it's sometimes better to overreact than underreact. I think the big difference with partition or anything that's happened in the past that has also involved trauma is just the fact that this crosses all national boundaries. I mean, I don't think there is a single part of the world which is in some way or the other not affected by the spread of Corona. So it's truly global. But, you make a good point about panic and whether we are overreacting or underreacting. My sense is the global experience shows, as I said earlier, it's better perhaps to overreact than underreact. I think the key though, and this is the dilemma that all governments are facing, is that the longer the health emergency continues, the longer the lockdown continues, the worse it is for the economy. And therefore there will be people who will suffer, not necessarily because of Corona, but because of the fallout on their lives and livelihoods. And I think that is a big challenge, particularly in a country like India, where millions of people live literally on the margins of society, and where social distancing, frankly, Karan, is a privilege. A friend of mine sent me some pictures only yesterday about Dharavi and the way this slum in Mumbai, for those who don't know about Dharavi, is an area where people live 6 to 8 to a room. Now, what kind of social distancing can you practice in Dharavi? At the same time, many of them work in the informal sector, and the informal sector, on which 80% of this country is dependent, has been completely crushed by Corona. So I think these are huge challenges, current dilemmas, and call for a fundamental reset of government policy.
But in a sense, the point you've made goes right back to the starting point of our discussion. Are we evaluating the crisis we face adequately and maturely? I'm not criticizing governments. Please don't misunderstand me, but I'm raising a question that I think governments need to ask themselves as well. And it was best expressed to me by a man called Anant Nageshwaran, who's a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. So he will not veer towards criticizing this government. In a sense, he's part of the government. And he said to me very clearly in an interview we did yesterday that epidemiologists have an incentivization to exaggerate. There are a whole range of epidemiological surveys in every single country that are available, and they vary very considerably. To take the Indian case, there is a study done by scholars of Johns Hopkins University as well as the Center for Disease Dynamics in America, which says that by July, India could have between 300 and 500 million infected people. On the other hand, there's a study done by the Armed Forces Medical College, I believe it's in Pune, which says that by the end of May, we'd have 3 million. There's a huge difference between the two. And what Nageshwaran was pointing out is that epidemiologists as a profession have a tendency to not just push towards the worst case scenario, but when they advise governments, rather than burden governments with conflicting advice or multiple choices that governments may feel insecure having to handle, they simply push one line, and the line they push is the worst case scenario. Now, what happens is experts in the form of bureaucrats take up the same approach, and therefore prime ministers and health ministers are getting simply one line of argument. Then they look around the world and they see every other country is responding in the same way as well, and it becomes very difficult for any one government to be an outlier and act differently. No government wants to be wrong. And let's be fair to governments, there's no doubt that the cost of being wrong is huge, either if you're wrong in terms of the scale of the virus, because then the damage to the economy is huge, or if you're underrating the scale of the pandemic, then the number of deaths will be huge. And so it's a very difficult choice, because either way, you could be terribly, terribly wrong, which is why I think we need to be very careful. Now, I think one of the jobs of a leader is actually to be able to handle conflicting, perhaps even opposite sets of opinion that are coming, and come to some sort of in a sense. In the early days, Trump was trying it. He got it terribly wrong. We now see the outcome in America. But the Swedes are doing it as well. And so far, they've done it pretty successfully. I know there are concerns that maybe Sweden is underreacting, but at the moment, they're leading a fairly normal life, and the number of cases and the number of deaths in Sweden is pretty low. That is also true of Iceland. Now, those are very small cases, I accept. But think of the Indian situation, where if you go entirely by the worst case epidemiological surveys and effectively lock down your economy, you are pushing 36% of your country, that is the number of people who are migrant workers. 36% of our population, according to the 2011 labor survey, are migrant workers. That's the size of people, almost 4 of thereabouts 100 million. You're pushing them out of jobs. These are daily wage earners or people who depend on weekly incomes, because I'm also including into this the people who work for the unorganized sector as well as rural landless labor. You're pushing them out of jobs. They not only face hardship, they face hunger. Many of them will die. And our capacity as a system to reach out to them is very minimal. I won't go into what the government's done, but it's very minimal, because a very small proportion of these people actually have the Jan Dhan accounts. And if they do, they'll be in villages, not in towns where they're working. So you have when the government, the Indian government, has to decide between the two options, how it goes, and you have to balance it carefully.
You know, these are difficult choices. You know, when you put those two figures, a John Hopkins figure and an AFMC figure, and describe the variation, the fact is we are in uncertain, uncharted territory. There is no one standard formula that works at the moment beyond saying that social distancing is necessary. And as I said earlier, in the Indian context, social distancing means something very different to even a Sweden or Iceland, to give two examples of the countries you cited, very small, homogeneous countries, which in any case have a high amount of social distancing because of low density of population. In the Indian context, given the kind of density of populations we have, social distancing beyond the point is difficult to actually put into practice. Plus, as you said, the large number of migrant workers and people who are living on the margins. Even if we estimate they're about 20 to 30% of India's population, that comes to a significant 30 to 40 million of Indians who are living on the margins today. And that is a population which is larger than most countries in the world. My point, Karan, is there was an interesting point which a very erudite DMK MLA from Madurai, Dr. Tyagarajan, made to me yesterday, saying, we in India have done the most severe lockdown with the least stimulus. And I think that is the challenge that we have. How do you, in a way, ensure some kind of a safety net in a country which does not guarantee social security to those today who need it desperately? And achieving that balance is going to be difficult, because no government, Karan, and I've been speaking to a number of ministers in states, and I think we need to realize that in a way, this challenge is not so much about what happens at the center, but in states. And many of the chief ministers appear extremely reluctant to withdraw from the lockdown or suggest that we are easing the lockdown for fear It's an apprehension, a fear that if we lift the lockdown, and God forbid, if the numbers rise tomorrow, we will be blamed. This is a catastrophe. In a democracy, that's the challenge. An authoritarian regime like China, where it started, can easily make can make those choices a little more easily. A country like India, with democratic pulls and pressures, let's take Kerala, for example. There's an election there in less than a year, and therefore the chief minister has to weigh his options a little bit more carefully. So you have, in a democratic system, the choices that you have to make at times like this become that much more difficult. Do I push ahead with a severe lockdown? What will be its economic cost? And in India at the moment, Karan, my sense is the lockdown is necessary, but it desperately needs an economic package far greater than what we've got at the moment. Because unless you do that, people will really start to hurt. It's not about food. I don't think it's about hunger. It's about livelihoods. I think that really is the Indian challenge. And I don't think, therefore, we can emulate models of the Western world and say, look, the West is doing a severe lockdown. We're going to do likewise in this country. I think we're going to have to find an Indian way of managing Corona, irrespective of which figure turns out to be right, the John Hopkins figure or the AFMC. There has to be an Indian way of managing the lockdown that provides a sense of insulation to those who are hurting the most. And I still feel that we have a long way to go in that. Some states have begun that, and I think Kerala again is a good model. I think they've been ahead of the curve in realizing that you've got to push on social spending and ensure that people get the rations they need, that they are in a way protected from the economic fallout of Corona. So it's a very interesting challenge. And I'd like to know from you whether you believe that a democratic society, in a sense, will find it much more difficult to confront the Corona challenge than authoritarian regimes like, let's say, China, or smaller, more homogeneous societies like Taiwan, which has been successful, South Korea, or dare I say Singapore, which is much more disciplined.
I'll answer that question for you, but I want to go back to an issue that you raised earlier because I think it's fundamentally important to us in India. And that is the question not of choice, but once you've committed yourself to a lockdown, and I accept that a lockdown was inevitable, but I think it was done without adequate preparation, and more importantly, it was probably done without adequate notification. South Africa is a more or less similar situation like ours. They declared a nationwide lockdown with, I believe, 72 hours notice so that people could be prepared for it. We declared it with 3 hours notice. More importantly, something the government cannot have but known is the number of people who would be unable to provide for themselves once the lockdown began. And once again, I repeat that figure from the Labour survey of 2011, because it's a government survey. 36% of our entire population is migrant labor, and they are mainly in the big cities. So it would have been quite clear to the government that this is a sizable proportion, touching probably 400 million, who would be left in cities without income, without food. And by the way, remember, these are people who, because they're migrant labor, don't run their own kitchens. They eat in small dhabas. So when those dhabas shut down, there's nowhere to go with their money. They would have to leave. And look what the government did as a package for them. Let's just take the example of rural landless labor alongside people who become unemployed from the unorganized sector, alongside daily wage workers. Just these three. What is it that the finance minister has done for them to provide a safety net? As far as I can tell, it's just two things. She's increased the NREGA rate, but frankly, NREGA work is not going to happen in a lockdown. Many states were actually giving more. And as Jean Drèze pointed out, part of the increase is the annual built-in increase. So it's not even a special increase. But because NREGA work isn't happening, it's a meaningless increase. And the second way these people benefit is because some of these three categories will undoubtedly have wives with Jan Dhan accounts, and they will get 500 rupees a month, which is not a great sum of money, for 3 months. But those wives with their accounts will be in villages. So that provides a very, very slender safety net for wives and children, but not for the men. And it's this absence of notification, plus an imperfect, if even that is an adequate word, safety net to help them once you've gone ahead with the lockdown, that makes me feel that this was not properly thought through. Now, I can't see why a government that is so aware of the particular challenges India poses would not have thought this through. And
you know,
let me just finish and then you come. And it worries me because this is one way in which, in fact, a democracy is able to focus government's attention on the most needy. Remember, Amartya Sen has argued that in a democracy, handling famine is better because information flows and correction happens. And that logic ought to apply even to handling coronavirus. Obviously, enforcing a lockdown in a country like India or America or Britain will be a lot more difficult because we cherish the right to personal choice and liberty in a way in which Chinese don't. They're not used to it. They've been denied it for so long, they don't question when it is denied to them. But beyond that, because of the democracy, I would have thought our system would have borne in mind the challenges the people faced and catered for it. And it's not a question of stimulus. That I think will probably come later, and that will be directed at industry. I think this is provision of safety net, and that has not been done. And that's why I think, as a democracy, we're failing the very people who elect our government.
You know, all fine points, Karan. In fact, I should correct myself. You rightly said it's not 30 million, 300 million. It's about 25-30% of India's population that lives on the margins. Again, to quote Dr. Tyagarajan, the DMK MLA, he made a good point. Most states today have the data of how many migrant workers exist within a particular district. At the district level, data can be got. What is the level of hospitalization that is taking place? So you know the extent in a particular district of the level of to which coronavirus has spread. Remember, there are 724 districts in the country, but around 62 are the ones which as of now are badly affected. So that's less than a 10. Could one model be that on the health side, you focus almost exclusively or certainly extensively on the districts that are worst off, and you find a safety net for all Indians who are living on the margins? I think what any package needs is not to make those fine distinctions that were made. I'm giving you 20 rupees more for Manrega. I'm going to give a little bit here for construction workers. There should have been a blanket giveaway. And I think one of the strengths of the Modi government was the so-called JAM Trinity, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, Mobile. Now, this is a moment, if you believe that you've actually used Aadhaar and Jan Dhan to reach out to those marginal workers who didn't have bank accounts, let's say 5 years ago, this is your moment to walk the talk, to ensure that they do get the monies in their accounts. So I think this is a challenge. Look, I think Karan, Mr. Modi in the past has been extremely politically astute in realizing that he can't win elections without the support of the poor. And if you saw in the 2019 campaign, he kept reiterating Garib Kisan. In fact, in my book, I call it the GK of his success. Garib Kisan was part of his success formula, that he knew that he needed to ensure through schemes like Ujjwala, better targeted, well distributed, that those at the bottom of the pyramid got the benefits. Now, if you could do that ahead of elections, you now need to do it again, even more extensively and with even greater use of data than ever before in the context of Corona. As I said, I don't think at the moment you have adequately addressed that need. I agree with you. I do also believe, and I reiterate, I do believe state governments have an even greater role to play this time than just the center. The center needs to provide the finances, the funds to state governments. They haven't at the moment even given GST compensations that are overdue to certain states. Then it's for the state governments to ensure that they target the funding to those who need it the most. And I think this is a moment for our chief ministers to shine. In a strange way, this is not about brand Modi, but Team India. And I agree with you that there needs to be greater center-state coordination. I thought February was the missed month. In February, when the first case happened on January 31st, we should have extensively prepared through the kinds of meetings between state and center that are only now taking place. We should have had a national protocol in place. We should have ensured that the PPE equipment that was so desperately needed, the orders were placed well in advance, realizing that we could be facing this situation. The public transport system should have been geared up for a situation like Corona. So I think February, where we were busy welcoming Donald Trump, where Parliament was still in session. I think that was the missed month where we needed greater center-state coordination. But I think the lockdown was inevitable, was necessary. We could argue whether there was 3 hours notice or 3 days notice. What the government, the ministers tell me is the reason to give 3 hours notice is if there was 3 days, there would have been panic for 72 hours. Instead, this time there was panic only for 3 or 4 hours. This is their explanation. I think public transport was something where the government could have sort of looked at it as a distinct element and said, look, we need to continue with the public transport system for another 48 hours, perhaps to ensure that people can go back to their homes. The reason why a lot of migrant workers are going back to their villages, Karan, is not just because of loss of livelihood. It's also because of fear and panic, and they would rather stay at home within their community than live in urban lives where, you know, there is the old sociological word enemy. You suffer from a sense of normlessness and a feeling that you're disconnected to the world around you. I think we need greater sensitization. You know, there's a lot of coercion in a lockdown, but there's very little compassion. I'll just give you one example here, Karan. In Goa, for example, the moment the lockdown was announced, the chief minister interpreted it to mean all shops must close. Till 2 days before that, he was busy campaigning in a panchayat election. The moment this announcement is made, he suddenly says every shop in Goa is closed, including grocery and essentials. For 2 days, people were struggling to get essentials like milk. Goa is not a producing state. They needed vegetables from across the border, from Karnataka and Maharashtra. The borders were sealed. So I think there was a lack of rationality at times.
Something more than lack of rationality, frankly, and I want to be really blunt, and I hope I don't offend anyone, but when a chief minister decides that every single shop is going to shut in the state, including groceries and pharmacies, then forgive my bad language, but he is being a bit of a fool. I was going to say bloody fool, but a fool. No chief minister should actually decide every single shop will shut. How on earth will people live? It's such a bizarre and silly thing for anyone to do. Frankly, he's a young chief minister, so maybe inexperience and youth will forgive him, but it is an incredibly silly response for any government to come up.
But there are other chief ministers who perform rather well. I mean, if you look in Delhi, where we live, at least in terms of essential services, or Mumbai, you know, chief ministers have recognized early on that essential services are critical, that rations are critical to provide. I think these are the challenge. You know, one of the problems, and this is a practical problem. There was a family who sought my help, a family again that lives on the margins, for ration. And I said, don't you have a ration card? They said, yeah, sir, we don't have a ration card, we have an Aadhaar card, but they won't give us rations based on Aadhaar. So you see, there are practical problems when it comes to people who live on the margins, middle class families as well. Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
It's even worse than that, because Arvind Kejriwal has said that in Delhi, anyone and everyone will be given a ration card if they don't have one, and therefore they will be given rations. The problem is, how do you get a ration card? You have to apply on the net. You have to have a phone on which to receive an OTP. Now, if you don't have access to the net, you don't have a mobile that gives you an OTP, you're not going to get that ration card. Frankly, this is the moment for the government to say, just turn up at a ration shop. We'll stamp your hand with indelible ink so that you don't go to multiple shops and claim rations. But that is all you need to do. Come and get it and go. This is a crisis moment as far as these people are concerned. Bureaucratic procedures that it is impossible for them to fulfill are wrong. And
so guess what I did, Karan?
State government that is actually
guess what I did in this case, Karan?
Of the feeding centers, 65% run by all state governments are in Kerala. 65%. Kerala has 15,000 compared to UP, which has 3. And UP's 3,000 includes several that are run by NGOs, not the government. That is the difference in the way two state governments are responding. And yes, you're right. This is a test for center-state relations, but I believe one problem states face, which the government has yet not addressed in Delhi, is that states are no longer after GST in a position to raise funds and revenue. That has to be granted to them by Delhi. The fiscal deficit extent to which they can go has to be granted by Delhi. Delhi seems to be rather slow in doing it. And earlier, if you recall, somewhere towards the end of March, there was a stage where, in fact, the government went to the Supreme Court to stop the Kerala government doing some things that Kerala wanted to. And sadly, the Supreme Court agreed with the Delhi government. Now, if you're going to actually start going to court to stop state governments for doing things, and if the courts unthinkingly will go technically rather than in a humanitarian way, then you have a bigger problem.
The fact, Karan, is that, when I asked a minister about this, about why aren't you putting more funds into Corona, look at what the US, for example, has done. They put $2 trillion. They said, we don't have the money, we don't have that kind of bandwidth to put in money into the system at the moment. It'll take time. And I think that is one of the concerns in the Indian context. In comparison with certain other countries. Corona has come at a time when the economy was in decline, when the government's revenues are under strain. But, I think I'm not cutting them slack entirely, but I do believe that they are facing very difficult times, Karan. And I would have, as I said, therefore liked the planning to have started a little earlier. We can argue as to how much earlier. The Kerala example, again, I think is a revelation of the investments the state has made over the years in public health. You speak to politicians from Kerala and they seem so much more involved in public health systems than the politicians of the so-called Bimaru states. The Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, who've been left behind over the years. So Kerala's local public health services are standing the state in good stead. Now people ask me, but look at the number of coronavirus cases are much higher in Kerala than in North India. The reason for that is very simple. The reason is Kerala's testing more. Kerala's been testing earlier, it's been testing more. Also, interestingly, these are parts of the country where you have populations that have links to the Gulf, have links to other parts of the world, through social contact. You've seen the numbers rise in a Maharashtra or a Mumbai, in a Kerala. But I think, I think there is a lesson here that states which have invested over the years in public health are much better prepared today to tackle Corona than those that were not. Having said that, I do believe that therefore this is a wake-up call, for these states to gear themselves up to medical preparedness. I'm glad to see that many states are now finally talking about not just COVID hospitals, but just building more hospitals with more beds. When was the last time, Karan, health was ever a political issue in that sense, that people that the politician or the elected representatives went to the people and said, we'll build more hospitals. Everybody talks about building places of worship. Nobody talks about building hospitals. And the number of per capita beds in a Bihar or a UP are just shockingly low. And in comparison, there is also a deepening divide between states, Karan, between certain states that seem to be in a far better position to handle a pandemic than other states which over the years have spent far too much time in their caste community battles, in investing in the wrong areas. I just don't know why people invest in statues. Do we really need a grand statue of Shivaji or a Sardar Patel? So much better to have a Sardar Patel hospital, which is a world-class hospital, or a Shivaji hospital, which is world-class. We need to reorder priorities, I think. And I think this pandemic is a wake-up call in that sense.
Well, I hope so, but I have a horrible feeling that as soon as we feel that we've actually got over the worst, and let's hope that happens soon rather than late, although there's no guarantee when it will happen, that we will go back to our bad ways of thinking. We're a country where politicians have been allowed to get away with not just sloppy thinking, but actual disregard for fundamental concerns. Building a Shivaji statue, building a statue to Sardar Patel, spending 3,000 or 4,000 crore rupees behind it is, to my mind, sloppy thinking. But actually ignoring education and health is taking the wrong decisions for your people. It's ensuring that you do not have a population that will ever be in a position to compete. And that's a problem that's continued from 47 onwards.
So would you, for example, Karan, renovate the central vista of Parliament for 20,000 crores? Should that project now be put completely on the back burner?
I wouldn't have done it anyway, because I think there's a lot to be said for preserving iconic historic buildings and renovating them so that they continue to be of use. Look, the British Houses of Parliament must be 700 to 800 years old. At the very best of time, the House of Commons cannot take more than 300 or 400 people. Their total membership is 650. And their answer is a very simple one. very, very rarely is Parliament chock-a-block full. But on the odd occasion when it isn't, people are standing, that actually adds to the atmosphere, adds to the sense of urgency. Let them stand for those half an hour, 40 minute debates. For the rest of the time, Parliament is not full. We need to find ways of adapting around the need to change the buildings we inherited from the British, not destroy them, do away with architectural heritage, and try and create a new Indraprasth because somehow the Modi government believes this will be its gift to India. So I think sloppy thinking as well as failure to address real concerns are the two issues I hope will change. But I have a horrible feeling if and when, well, I don't want to say it, when we go back to normal times, we will also slip back to our poor thinking. The one thing
but let me give a positive. Let me give a positive spin also, Karan.
This point, because I think it's an important part. I think one area where we will have to pay a lot of concern, and it's a point that is highlighted by Shyam Saran in his article in Business Standard today, is that if we do not adequately pay and provide adequate living facilities, that includes more than just health and education, but actual accommodation for the migrant labor who are essential to our industry, our services, and to the very functioning of our cities, it's quite possible large numbers of them may not choose to come back, because this break has given them a chance to realize what sort of conditions they live in and the extent to which they are being, and I use this word carefully, exploited by the system. They are not the beneficiaries of it, we are. And I have a feeling that if the logic in Shyam's article turns out to be correct, this is one area where you will find a slow, steady, but hopefully increasing change.
I wish I was as hopeful. My fear is at the end of the day, people are left with no choice. They will come back to the cities. I saw that even after the riots of 92, 93, when people's lives were destroyed, they eventually had to find their way back to the big city for employment. My sense, though, is that, the Prime Minister in one of his addresses appealed to industry, for example, not to cut salaries, not to downsize. What's the reality? The reality is people are losing jobs. The Restaurant Owners Association was telling me about the lakhs of people who are dependent on restaurants, and businesses have collapsed, and many of them have simply asked their workers to have laid off their workers. So layoffs are a reality in the Indian context, particularly in the informal sector. They have absolutely no protection. Again, to give you in the context of a Sweden and Iceland, Western societies at least ensure that safety net that has never existed in our society, and neither have businessmen been conscious of that. And there has been an exploitative.
Layoffs are a reality because they're unavoidable. Just think of it. Airlines, restaurants, hotels have a cash flow problem. They do not have the reserves to carry on providing salary for 3 weeks or 4 weeks when there is no money being earned.
Yeah, but how do I open up restaurants? How do I open up malls? How do I open up cinema theaters? How do I ask airlines to resume business?
No, if these restaurants, these hotels, these airlines and these companies don't either cut salary or lay off, they will not survive as companies. They have a choice between either cutting salaries but surviving as a company that will then later on be able to restore jobs, or collapsing now and going under completely. And the
point
in France, Germany, and in particular Britain, Rishi Sunak, who's of Indian origin, he's Narayan Murthy's son-in-law, actually came up with a promise that the British government would pay up to 80% of everyone's.
That's the furlough scheme.
Incentivize employers and entrepreneurs not to sack. We certainly can't afford to do anything of that scale. But certainly the government could have said that for a certain category of employees, those who are the most worse off, we will provide 40-50% as a guarantee. It would have meant that you would be spending money you didn't have. It would mean that the RBI would have to be printing money. But that's happening the world over. It's not new.
Sure. There are the likes of Arvind Subramaniam who are calling for a national solidarity fund, getting the people, the rich in a sense, or those who can afford it to pay more for such a fund. These are ideas, but the real world is very different. I think we need to make that distinction between an ideal world and the real world which is out there. The real world is extremely harsh and exploitative, and it's been so for the longest possible time. So those who live on the margins will continue to suffer. But let me give you a positive story, Karan, because we've been looking at the negative. The positive story is the so-called Bhilwara model, which a number of states are now adopting or embracing or certainly looking at. When in Bhilwara, there was a corona outbreak 10 days ago, The government there got its entire machinery together, went house to house, complete lockdown. But within a week, we've seen a flattening of the curve there in Bhilwara. Now, of course, this is one district of the country, but the manner in which the Rajasthan government, along with the bureaucracy, and I think if you have strong DMs, district collectors working on the ground for a particular purpose, it's possible to have a controlled lockdown for a very specified period, because the initial outbreak was caused by social contact, and thereby ensure that it doesn't spread into the community. Now, could we embrace this Bhilwara model across the country? It's a possibility. But again, I think it requires a great commitment from local officers, from the last mile delivery. I keep maintaining, Karan, I don't think Corona can be fought with a highly centralized approach. I think for much too long, we've had highly centralized decision making in this country. And this predates even Mr. Modi. But in the Modi era, it's, when you've had demonetization, for example, decisions are taken without taking states or local authorities into confidence. And I think this is a moment to do so. You decide on a 9-minute diya jalao. We can have our own debate whether symbolism works or not. But at the end of the day, power ministers need to be consulted. They are the ones who are going to have to work to ensure that the grid doesn't trip. So I think major decisions during this Corona period need to have a new style of leadership that's much more consensual, that's based on collaboration, not about building personality cults. So it's a challenge. It's, as I said, from brand Modi to Team India, it's a huge challenge to order a reset in the way we think. Bhilwara is an example. If you focus on localized control of the outbreak, maybe it can work. And you need to have stakeholders. You need to involve all the stakeholders. You need to involve the best experts in the medical field. And for example, a Mumbai senior official, Karan, was telling me that they wanted to push much earlier to give permission for testing to private labs. For the longest time, in those few days, ICMR, which is the nodal body, sat on it. And bureaucrats in the ICMR or doctors here had a very different view to those on the ground. And there was no meeting point for days. And according to him, they lost valuable days. Now, you need rapid response. Similarly, when it comes to protective equipment, you need rapid response to ensure that our doctors, my son is a doctor, so I feel very strongly about this, that those on the front line are fully adequately protected in government hospitals, in private hospitals. And these are the issues that will require a very different kind of leadership at the local level and the national level.
Absolutely. And I'm going to end now by simply making one point, which in a sense is also a sort of perverse good news point. And that is, we are deeply, deeply concerned in India whether we're testing enough people. And I am sure that we are not testing enough people. But what we're not actually drawing more comfort from is that if the number of deaths are accurate, and I presume they are, because deaths are more difficult to hide, but if the number of deaths are accurate, then in fact there is a certain level of comfort we can draw from the fact that our mortality rate seems to be significantly different to that of Europe and America.
Sure.
I think all hinges on whether we're actually accounting for all those people who died of COVID, or whether there are some or many who have died of COVID, but we haven't, for whatever reason, recognized those as COVID deaths. That would be worrying. But whilst
let me add to that, Karan.
It's important to increase the testing and to vastly increase it. Remember, what the increase in testing will do is actually further lower your mortality rate. Because the number of people tested goes up, the proportion that is actually dying becomes smaller. That's simply because the denominator is growing. So I'll end now because I'm going to have to disappear and get on with other things. And it's been a pleasure talking to you.
I'm going to give you, you've got to give me 60 seconds.
Small linings to this dark, big, black cloud. But
you've got to give me my final 60 seconds, Karan. To take off from where you left, this morning my mother, who's all of 75, lives in Mumbai on her own, rings me up to say, should I take a BCG vaccine? So I said, why? She said, when I was young, we didn't have this BCG vaccine inoculation. She'd seen a program where a school, where someone who was in Mumbai when I was growing up, is now a doctor in Houston, has just done a study that countries which have mass BCG vaccination programs are possibly more capable of resisting coronavirus than countries like the United States, which do not have such mass inoculation program. And it's very interesting, Karan, that in a way, taking off from what you said, maybe there is something to that. Maybe we are perhaps better prepared in terms of our immunity to take on corona. I hope so. And if you draw what I call the Kanpur line, those on the east of it, in the more poorer states of eastern India, actually fewer cases coming there and much more in the so-called market-driven, outward-looking states of Western India and Southern India. So we don't know. The one issue, Karan, that we didn't discuss, of course, is the Tabligis. And remember, it's been contentious. I don't know if you have a view on that.
Very can answer that, because, you know, alongside the Tabligis, but a few days later, was the instance of a gentleman called Suresh who returned from Dubai. Now, with a name like Suresh, I don't have to even tell you what his religion is. He returned from Dubai. He held a party of sorts for some 2,000 people in Morena in Madhya Pradesh to mark his mother's death. It was a sort of wake, I imagine. He and his wife then got infected. Everyone at that party had to be quarantined. 10 or 15 at the party got infected. And now there are reports that 25,000 people that they in turn have made need to be quarantined. And remember, Morena is in a small little village in rural Madhya Pradesh. It's not a place that you have medical infrastructure to handle this. But that's not being talked about at all. I'm not saying that we should politicize either. I'm not saying that we should attach motives and some of the hideous hashtags that went across media channels like Corona Jihad were just reprehensible and disgusting. But what I'm saying is that because of the nature of our society, if we can balance, let's do it. It's not whataboutery, but if you're going to give one example, give another as well. So that the wrong message doesn't go. But Rajiv, I'm going to have to run to forgive.
Thanks very much, Karan. Let's just say that let's not communalize corona. The Tabligis were irresponsible, but so have several others. And remember one cardinal rule a doctor told me: respect the virus. The virus knows no religion, national or caste boundaries.
And that's a message Yogi Adityanath should hear, because remember, just hours after the Prime Minister announced a lockdown, literally,
yes,
something like 10 or 12 hours later, he appeared with 40 officials at the placing of a Ram's statue. And not just did he breach the lockdown, which was by then enforced, but he got 40 officials to breach it with him. And then he had the temerity to deliver a little speech on the need to observe social distancing. He just breached himself, and he then wanted to teach people how to do it. I think that is an example of outright hypocrisy that also must be pointed out.
Absolutely. And let's not therefore reduce corona either to event management, or let's not use it as an instrument to divide. This is a collective challenge that must be faced. Karan, it's been great to do our first conversation in a way that we've both done in our lives on Zoom in this manner. But I hope it's been, I found it extremely illuminating, and I hope the viewers also do. The politics of pandemic.
I found it great fun, and it was wonderful to be able to see you after such a long time. You look well. You look
and we didn't mention about the thali. I wonder, Karan, did you do the thali or the lighting of diya, or is that not a question to ask?
Actually, by the way, I did. I walked out on the veranda on that Sunday afternoon with a bartan or a patila and bagged it away until Chandra came to me and said, "Sari naraz ho jayenge, itna na bajaiye." So I went.
That's excellent. Sadvika and I actually did it as well, because our son, we believe, is a doctor. So we were in a way sending out a message to him. He's in Manipal, and we even put it up on Facebook. And suddenly people said, "Oh, you become a Modi bhakt." So I said, "Look, I've done it because I'm very happy to sort of remember my son this evening." Look, symbolism is important, but I think in the end, as my son put it, just give us better facilities. We don't want your talis and thalis. We want better facilities in all the hospitals across the country.
Doctors have today been told on the front pages of papers that they must use their PPE and their N95 masks for 4 days at a time. They've been told that they have to disinfect them and then leave them out in the open. Quite what leaving them out in the open means, I don't know. But they will have to use their protective gear for 4 or 5 days at a time. That is deeply depressing. And really, this is what our government should be more concerned about, rather than getting us out to do talis. So one last thing, just in case the world got the wrong impression, India did not teach Europe to come out onto their balconies and thank and clap for their health workers. We copied the Italian and the Spaniards. Let's be honest about it. The idea came from them. We may have taken it to another level, but the idea.
Well, I'm not sure whether the Italians then carried out processions with their talis and thalis or burst crackers, but that's another story for another day. As at the end of the day, Karan, it's, as I said, a moment for all of us to introspect and perhaps for all of us to reset our lives. Maybe we can do the future of television from our homes rather than in a studio.
Absolutely. Thank
you very much.
Take care, Rajdeep, and remember, green suits you.
Yes. Okay. Stay home. Stay safe.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us.
I hope that was great.
Thanks a lot, Rajdeep. Thank you so much, Karan. And thank you to everyone who joined us. The next session will be with Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal, who's the chairman of Hero Enterprise. Same time next Wednesday, which is April 15th at 11:30 a.m. On the same platform. See you then. Thanks a lot.